So a little bit of a treat today, and the celebration of the end of Midseason Madness. We're going to be doing something a little bit different with our weird composition, weird strategy analysis, and we're going to be going over 6 different strategies at rapid fire succession, going over all of the different compositions, different hero picks, and some of the weird stuff that happened over this past weekend in Korea. So we're going to get started off with the MN3 Bastion. So the Seoul Infernal whipped out the Bastion on Lijiang Tower. And this is something we've been seeing off and on different maps and different situations, especially in Shambali Monastery. The key thing with the Bastion is that it's essentially played when the off angles and flanks aren't very conducive or not very rewarding to playing hit scan. Also in situations when you don't want to play the Sombra. So essentially on this map, you can absolutely take off angles with your hit scan to get pressure, but it's not as strong. And the Bastion is like a cheat hack for first fight where there's a big clumped up fight in the first choke. And you can see just how much pressure that MN3 is able to get out of that initial cooldown trade with his turret form. The grenade as well gets massive value. So this is one of those maps where there just isn't a ton of space to be able to utilize the hit scan. Now, interestingly enough, the Seoul Infernal did roll out on Cassidy when they were playing up against Houston, and they expected dives. So the Bastion is really only in the brawl mirrors. But even on the retake, for example, here, Mayhem going through this next choke, again, not a lot of off angles for merit to get space with the Sojourn. So even on the retakes, the Bastion feels pretty nice coming from the enemy team standpoint. Worth noting, by the way, the Seoul Infernal did retake with the Bastion once when they had ultimate, but after that fight was lost, they then made the swap over to Ramattra for a faster retake and probably just a better hero in the brawl mirror. But whenever there's any sort of space and there's a big clump without a lot of off angles, usually sort of niche situations in the brawl comps, the Bastion gets a heck of a lot of value and something that's definitely cheesy, probably not optimal, but definitely good enough to punish people and certainly worth rolling out on. So credit goes to Infernal, looked pretty good. We're gonna move on to the Echo pick. So Echo is something that's been analyzed a lot recently, and there's a couple of reasons why you might pick Echo. The first reason is it's very map specific. It's a cost specific dive pick in situations where the high ground is very valuable. You'll see it on Ilios Lighthouse, and you'll see it on Ilios Well for the high grounds on both of those. The other factor, and one factor that's very important and reason why it's not a very common pick, is that you really need an S tier Echo, at least an A tier Echo. Pelican, Stalker, I think Checkmate was somebody who was also doing relatively well with the Echo at points in the season 2. You really need a very strong mechanical Echo for this composition to work. Otherwise, other heroes are going to be able to perform better. But basically, the idea of the composition is just like Dive looks for executions on backline, just like Dive fights out for space by spamming out the take, just like Dive is able to shoot out DPS. That's exactly what the Echo does. But because the high ground is very accessible, she performs a little bit better than the Sombra does on a lot of other maps. You can see that Stalker and Pelican will alternate between leaning over the right side over the mini, as we see on frame right here, where it's very easy to fight for the mini health pack room. And what you do is, let me actually go back just a little bit here to kind of explain this here. So there's two different ways that you can approach this with your Echo, depending on what your team is going for. If you're positioning here, you have a lot better staging ground to dive bomb with stickies onto the backline that are positioned on the high ground. And then if that fails, a lot of times you'll see teams looking for, once the point unlocks, staging their Echoes from the high grounds over here. And this allows for better spam pressure on controlling point. Now, obviously, both of these teams look to be controlling the opposite side of point because the point hasn't unlocked yet. But if this fight had not been decided before then, we might have seen the Echoes drift off to the opposite side to put pressure on point. Echo with the sticky bombs onto high ground, onto backlines, is really powerful, really potent. And in addition to that, Echo can put out a lot of pressure on Monkey. Echo can honestly, if she gets the high ground advantage, can put out a little bit of a decent pressure onto spamming Tracer. That matchup isn't terrible if she's able to avoid the Sombra hack. And the other thing that's really big with Echo as well, and that's very rare for DPS, is that in dive mirrors, the ultimate is actually pretty good. A lot of the DPS ultimates, whether it's Tactical Visor, Hanzo ult, Cassidy ult, even something like Bob, which is okay, are just not as good as Copy. But Copy is like an actually really strong ultimate in the mirror, because you can copy an Ana, you can copy Tracer, you can copy Winston. We've even had seen value from copying Brigs. So there's a lot of good copy targets, so the Echo does pretty well in old economy as well. Again, requires a very powerful Echo player, requires specific maps where she can utilize high ground for staging onto either the backline or spamming out tanks or DPS. And obviously, something that a lot of teams have had mixed success with as well. I think Stalker did a phenomenal job in this map. Definitely was a surprise to me. This guy is just unfair. How is he so good at this many heroes? But yeah, anyway, that's pretty much it for there. We move on to the Moira Kiriko. Now, this one's going to take 2 specific fights. Now, First things first with this composition. This is basically a cheese. And the reason why this cheese is utilized is there's a couple reasons why. First off, Florida Mayhem is just a team that always likes to pull weird crap out of their hat. You know, it's not like you couldn't play Kiriko Lucio here. It'd be unplayable. I mean, it's definitely playable here. It's not like Florida couldn't mirror on a Brig here. It's definitely playable. But Florida always likes to roll the dice. They always like to mix things up. And I think it's totally reasonable. Now, one of the interesting things about this, and I'm wondering if this is the case, maybe I'm overthinking this a little bit, is that the problem with the Moira Kiriko composition is that it is not, if the enemy team were to like run on a Brig with a Diva, for example, they would have so many resources to spend on their Tracer. Their tank would be able to get so much peel / pressure value, and you would be able to do. I think Diva would be like an ideal swap versus the Moira Kiriko, because you won't need to worry about doing anything, just like marking the enemy monkey, marking the enemy DPS. The problem with the Moira Kiriko from Seoul Infernal's perspective is that there isn't really any one target to dive. Now, Winston doesn't necessarily always need an assassinable squishy to dive, but it definitely removes a lot of the value for Mag to look at the enemy composition and be like, there's nobody that can really like all in with a nano, all in with a primal. And I think this is part of Mayhem's strategy, at least to an extent. Basically, what you do as the Moira composition is you play really, really short sightlines, hyper aggressive, not always going in, but basically not giving any spam angles to the Ana, no nade angles, no echo spam, no tracer spam. Don't give that Brig pack onto DPS value. Just basically stuff with a Moira Diva working together and the Kiriko Tracer on a flank. And basically, don't give that Winston a dive target. You basically just keep the pressure on them 24/7. And Mag obviously doesn't really play a very strong Diva, so this might be something that Florida was doing on purpose to kind of exploit Mag's, not inflexibility, but not being able to play the other tank heroes to the same level as his monkey, because it removes that dive target, it removes the value of the nano, it removes the value of the primal rage, and so on. So I definitely think that's something that's factoring into this decision, but you also have to keep in mind that Mayhem tends to just roll the dice with this stuff. And it's also interesting to note that they play it on this map where it's pretty easy to avoid the high ground LOS if you play really, really short sightlines where the Ana Brig can't see you very well. And then you force them to drop, force them to a location where the Moira can actually engage on you. So anyway, basically this composition is just play Moira Diva playing hyper aggressive short sightlines and basically not giving the Winston a diveable target at the same time. Okay, and then a slightly different scenario here, so definitely worth noting, very similar circumstances where, again, Mayhem are going to swap off of the Doomfist Kiriko Lucio. They're going to put their Lucio on Moira, and they're going to put their Doomfist onto Diva. Now, let's talk about this. Same kind of play style. Very, very aggressive, short sightlines, looking for dives. Moira playing a lot with Diva. Kiriko can kind of play by herself and so on. Nothing's changed as much in terms of play style, but some of the reasons why Florida pull it out are different. Again, Florida never hesitate to roll the dice, never hesitate to flip things up. But this one makes a lot more sense because not only are you in another circumstance where Fearless is not likely to swap to Diva to quote-unquote counter this, but you are also in a situation where your support lineup has a problem because Choron can play Kiriko and RuPaul is a good Ana, but you're not going to be as good as Shu and Violet. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to match them in that support duo whatsoever. And the other problem about this particular map, and we've seen this problem from Mayhem previously in the season, is that Kiriko, like Lucio just sucks on this map. Lucio is just not very good in this map. It's just so open. He's basically chasing 24/7. It's really hard not to get isolated and hacked during these rotations. So you're kind of left with well, we don't want to mirror them on a Kiriko. We definitely don't have the capability to play Zen here, which a lot of teams have had mixed success with anyway. So what's the solution here? And this is where you roll the dice. You basically go, okay, well, this composition has a, I wouldn't say win condition, but has a solution versus the enemy team, even if it's not optimal. I feel that on this map, a well-executed Kiriko Ana is probably slightly better, especially if Houston were able to make the swap to the Diva. But Florida can't do that. And someone is a reasonable Diva, right? So I think for Mayhem, I think this swap made a lot of sense. And you're going to see it throughout this match. It goes to the point where actually Houston was having a hard time keeping Shu up and getting good value out of their nano. So they basically just said, okay, we give up, we'll go Moira too. And I think that was probably more of a spur of the moment decision, probably not something that Houston really calculated. These kind of mid-match adjustments do happen in matches, especially with smart players. And what basically happens is Florida gets off on a really, really bad foot. But once like the old economy kind of chills out, Mayhem start to kind of swing back in. The problem with the Houston Outlaws composition is that Mayhem has a solution for basically every ultimate that they can throw at them. Nano is very easy to kite and disengage with this composition. There really isn't any static Nano target whatsoever. For example, if you jump a Nano Monkey onto an Ana, the Kiriko will generally have to peel or TP, and then now you're getting double support value with an Nano Winston. There's nobody to primal, at least not nobody very easy. There's nobody that you can easily pulse bomb. There's nobody, the EMP is fadeable, Suzuable, avoidable entirely. Even Coalescence is something, like the changes to fade during Coalescence are a big buff here. So there's just so many solutions for pretty much all of Houston Outlaws ults that it could feel very bad to get good and consistent ult value. Houston, to win this, would need to be utilizing the Ana a lot more in terms of helping their DPS win duels. Similarly to how like we use like Harmony Orb and Discord Orb to win flanker wars so that your Zen can stay safe, kind of similar to that with Ana. Like you need your Ana to be playing to enable their DPS and play around nice long sight lines, because it's hard to get good just nade the backline and dive the backline, or nano your monkey. That's just not really going to work. So you have to be a lot more creative with how you get value of this. And I think like credit goes to Mayhem. Like this map ultimately comes down to the wire. And I think that a lot of it was due to their flexibility and being able to just pull something out of their hat and make it work. I don't even think saying pulling out of their hat was fair. I think this is definitely a composition that Mayhem had an idea of like how they wanted to play it and when they wanted to play it. The Moira Diva combo specifically is something that they were definitely practiced on. And it also enables your Kiriko to play a little bit more aggro. And from what we've seen of the Kiriko play from both RuPaul and Showwrong this season, they're both Kirikos that do like to play a little bit more aggressively. And having a Moira babysitting with your Diva instead of an Ana that the Kiriko has to babysit definitely opens up the Kiriko to do a little bit more. So very interesting evolution. Again, not something that I think we'll see a whole lot more of in the future, but occasionally, who knows? It's a cute little strategy, and I'm thrilled that we're seeing this kind of untested quote unquote non-meta. By the way, there's the EMP. You guys see that right there? Not great timing from Houston there, but that's not something that an Ana Kiriko could do. But yeah, anyway, cool stuff. So we're gonna move on to the Ramattra on Rialto. Little detail here. Nothing super revolutionary with this, but essentially the idea is this. You're going to see Hawk actually swap off of the Diva. So they just lost the initial high ground fight location, right? So basically what we're dealing with here is as soon as you get out of like this little section of the map here and move beyond that, even to the last choke, Rialto really is not a high ground focused map beyond that choke. It's a little bit of high ground, but if it was more high ground, then we'd probably be seeing more Winston. But it's just enough to where people have started to greed more Ramattra. You see the high ground that Happy's on right now, once the fight gets to the choke, that high ground is actually not that relevant. It's really hard to access and really hard to use. And so as you guys know, a lot of Rialto ends with these ugly, smashy brawl mirrors in these tight little chokes. And that's something where Diva is better at than a monkey, but a Ramattra is better than a Diva in terms of punching, getting ultimate value, and just generally holding the line without taking a lot of damage. Now, if this meta evolved further, would we see something like a Sigma? Probably not. No, I think the Ramattra is probably about the apex of this evolution. But anytime you're going to see these fights evolve past that high ground, they don't move to second, and they just get stuffed in that choke or in that wide open space, something that has a little bit more self-sustain, a little bit more short-range punch potential, and a significantly better ultimate is going to be favored. Not to mention the more poke that she can also provide in the more open spaces at longer ranges. So in this kind of trade, in this evolution, having a Ramattra is just significantly better than a Diva. There isn't really a better tank at controlling this choke safely and with more powerful ult economy. So not a surprise for either team to make this swap here. And obviously it looks pretty good for both sides. Okay, so nothing crazy there. We're gonna move on to this one's a fun one. Okay, so this one is one that I didn't get asked about, but I think it kind of flew under the radar actually. And I think it's a really it's a shame, because it was one of the most unique or interesting little counter swaps that we're probably never going to see again in the Overwatch League. It is Brig Brawl. Now you're asking, why is Brig being played with Ramattra Brawl with a May? Well, think about it. What is that other DPS going to be? I've already done a video on it, right? It's going to be Sombra, especially with these two teams, right? So Houston actually rolls out on the Brig, not the Lucio, expecting Lip to go Sombra. And the reason why that is actually Lucio is quite bad versus Sombra, at least compared to Brig. Brig is a lot harder to hack. Rally is a much more powerful ultimate into the threat of EMP. Lucio is a lot easier to hack and isolate and kill when he has to worry about EMP. And then also I think Violet's just a really good Brig. So I think like basically Brig can clear out Sombra on an off angle a little bit faster than Lucio. So there's a lot of little advantages that Brig has over Sombra when comparing versus the Lucio. So basically what Houston does is they say, okay, you're not going to play Sombra, we're going to go Brig. So Lip goes, you know what, I'm not playing Brig into Sombra into that, I'm going to play Sojourn. Problem with that, though, is Houston's not even mad, because we've already talked about why Sombra's being played here in the first place, and the answer is that there isn't a lot of sightlines. There aren't a lot of angles for Hitscan to get their work done, at least until parts of second point and obviously third point. So first point, it's rough, and you're going to watch this. I'm not going to play this full attack out, but Lip does air, doesn't get anything done, has zero space, zero angles, nothing done. And so actually the Brig ends up paying off in spades, even though the hero is very speed onable and killable in the brawl mirror, and that's probably where Atlanta needed to make it work. But they actually, just forcing Lip to go Sojourn was passive inherent value just in of itself. And as long as Violet's able to, let's put it this way, as long as Houston doesn't need to speed in, which is definitely a problem when you have things like, okay, we have to kite a nano, or we have to give speed for our nano, or Ramattra ult, or we have to speed out of their May ult. It's definitely a downside, but Houston's able to make it work. Being able to basically remove Lip from the entire game is enough value to compensate for the lack of speed boost. And Violet plays it really smart as well. So I think this is a really, really cool little adjustment from Houston. It's not something that we're likely ever to see again. It is Sombra specific, and we're not likely to see Sombra Brawl moving forward. It was a very, very niche strat and a very, very niche map, but it's super, super, super cool. And now this is where it gets really fun, though, because it doesn't just stop there, because look at what happens. And by the way, TLDR is that Lip does basically jack all until he gets ultimate, and then even then it's just not enough. So look at what happens when the tables are turned. So then now it's Atlanta defending, and Houston has been a team that can open Sombra. So they also open with the Brig. Now this is also cool because the Brig also enables the Sombra on an off angle more, because she's more of a ranged threat on the backline with Pack. So that's kind of a little cool advantage. So Houston goes, okay, well they're going to open Sombra surely, right? So what did Houston do? Well, Houston actually goes, you know what, screw it. We're not playing Sombra into that. We're going to play our Hanzo, because we think that composition is better. And now I like the Hanzo a little bit better, because I think the Hanzo's verticality provides something, the consistent non-cooldown related verticality is something that provides more value than the Sojourn. I also like Hanzo a lot better versus the Sombra. There's no, obviously you have to be a little bit scared of like getting run over sometimes, but Hanzo is not like a free hack kill target, and Happy is also a phenomenal Hanzo. So this is super cool to me. And I think like the Brig for both teams, one was initially rolled on to deny the Sombra, and then one was done to actively deny Lip Sombra. Chio, you could make an argument, could swap to Lucio here, but obviously at that point he'd already built up a lot of ult charge, so it wasn't worth it. And then basically TLDR is that Happy ends up getting a lot more value out of the Hanzo. Now the other thing too, as well, is one of the reasons why Hanzo or Hitscan is fragile is because a speed boosted Ramattra can very easily catch one of your Hanzos. Sojourn can just shift away, but Hanzo can't. But if your Ramattra doesn't have speed boost, then the Hanzo doesn't get punished. So I think Houston out executed Atlanta in terms of compositional performance, but also they counter them. Like they big brain counter them. They're one step ahead on both the defense and the offense in terms of the hero selection. So it was actually such a cute little thing that nobody's talking about that I really, really had to bring to light there. And then the last one here is a little bit of a 2-for-1. It's basically what were these guys smoking? What is this composition on defense? It's not as troll as you think. It's still I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It was troublesome to say the least. But basically, here's what we can draw. Florida Mayhem likes to running a Moira Lucio, right? They like the Moira Lucio in the Brawl Mirror. They've found a lot of success with getting on top of Batiste, forcing May cooldowns, basically just bursting people up. I did that recently in my Why the Orisa video. We talked a little bit about that. But we've also seen a little bit of a struggle for the Moira Lucio compositions in Koth this series doing well versus Ana Brig. It's not gone well. The Moira Lucio has really struggled versus the Ana Brig on Koth. The Sombra Tracer with Pocket have been able to put out too much early pressure. A lot of teams have really struggled to actually get on top of the Ana Brig with Moira Lucio, which you don't have to do, but it is a nice bonus and something that you'd like to do at points, especially when ults start to roll online. But from the surprisingly amount of the time, the Moira Lucio was getting basically just completely destroyed by Ana Brig, teams that were playing Ana Brig well. So basically, Bastion knows that this team likes to run Moira Lucio. Now, it's not necessarily Moira Lucio Dive, but it's Moira Lucio Ramattra. So what ends up happening is they roll out on this composition, and this is basically saying, hey, we've seen this composition have success versus Moira Lucio, so we're going to roll out on defense because you guys are the Moira Lucio team. And you don't even necessarily need them to be on like the full Brawl composition for it to work well. And Kalios is on Diva because if Kalios went Ramattra, they would still be able to isolate and wall this guy off and get favorable resource trades as opposed to D.Va, who's a lot more slippery and harder to like lock down. So basically, Bastion's theory here is solid. I just don't know if it justifies running this composition on this map. And Florida does struggle at first. They do get picked off and isolated from a lot of off angles from the DPS. Kalios is very easily able to trade out once they force cooldown. So, but unfortunately, Florida, as these fights devolve, are slowly able to isolate people. They're able to scare off the backline, and then they catch Kalios with his pants down. Kalios gets caught with like an icicle during a remech, which is actually really unfortunate. So they isolate. Honestly, it's not even a bad cooldown trade from Florida, but then Kalios gets isolated here, and like look at this icicle, like look at the timing of this. It's like so unfortunate, right? Oh my gosh, right? Very winnable fight, but then ultimately, not only does that cost Kalios his life, but it baits Lee Jae-gong to walk forward, and that's exactly what this composition wants you to do. They want you to walk forward, and then obviously that's going to kill him as well. So I don't think this was super well executed by Bastion, and then in the heat of battle, they end up having to make some swaps, and then they go Hanzo, and they hold here for a little bit, but Florida does a really good job of being able to close the distance without taking too much damage and being able to isolate individual targets. And then this is where it gets really weird. So on the attack, Bastion, who I said had a crap brawl, has been able to do some weird alternative brawl stuff that has actually worked and made me look like a clown. Not the first time. However, Bastion very clearly did not want to take a honest, static, traditional brawl mirror in terms of like the Ramattra, whatever. And I assume this had to do something with scrim results. I guess Bastion really had no confidence in their actual brawl because they do whatever this is. Now, this isn't a surprise. Maybe their scrim results were really, really bad. Maybe they felt like this was something that did okay versus brawl if it was played properly. I'm not so sure. It's definitely weird. It's basically saying we don't want to play the brawl. We're going to do something that like takes a lot of off angles, maybe Twilight and Decay in the flank. Lee Jae-gong keeps Kalios up. Birdring takes off angles. It's just weird, and it does not go well. Florida Mayhem is able to avoid the spam angles, able to basically isolate targets, and then it just progressively devolves down. But they do not want to play Lucio Brawl in the mirror. They do not want to. Even with Twilight Lee Jae-gong, they do not want to take the Lucio Brawl whatsoever. And then we end up getting Bap Zen, and then they go Orisa, because that's something that they've had success with on Koth. You guys remember that VOD review versus the Brawl. But that doesn't go well either because Florida is able to play cover significantly better. And it gets really, really, really ugly from here on out. So my first question, if you really want to be, if all the Bastion fans out there are like confused, my first question is why Shambali? If you don't want to take a brawl mirror, if you're very scared about the brawl mirror, why would you not go Rialto? I assume that, this had to be Bastion's pick because it's 2-0 Florida. So I'm pretty sure this is how the map selection went. But I'm surprised that I know Florida has historically a bad track record on this map, but you have to play to your strengths. You don't play to the enemy weaknesses most of the time. So unless Bastion must have been struggling a lot on Rialto recently and scrims or something like that, because it's strange to me that Bastion wouldn't play a map that feels more comfortable. You could play D.Va Sombra Tracer, D.Va Widow Tracer on Rialto. They've done fine. So something behind the scenes, scrim results, or some sort of confidence or whatever. But they didn't really have any answers for this. Even the defense was weird, had logic. The attack was weird, had logic. But at some point, something had to break. And unfortunately, it broke in pretty spectacular display. So anyway, I thought something a little bit different this time around. Going over all the tiny little details would be helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Check out Spilo 2, link in the description if you guys want any full VOD review stuff. And that's all I really got. Have a wonderful day.